Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. What is civility? What are the consequences of its absence, and why is it so important? Many people may inadvertently believe the words polite and civil are interchangeable. But as you hear and think about these words, you're probably already recognizing just how different they are. I'm so glad my guest, Alexandra Hudson, has dedicated years of her life to write a fantastic book about this topic, and it is hot off the press. The book is called The Soul of Civility: Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. Alexandra's website perfectly summarizes the book's relevance with this statement. In an era of fraught political tension, civility, a respect for the dignity of others, is the key to bridging the divide. I couldn't agree more. So many outstanding enterprises and causes, including the United States, have been the result of people with different points of view coming together and working together with civility. So with that end in mind, listen in as Alexandra shares her thoughts on the importance of civility. Alexandra Hudson, who also goes by the name Lexi, a hearty welcome to Super Psyched.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
I am so excited. When I heard about your book, I just thought to myself, this is so in my lane. This is what I care about. This is filling a need in society. I know you've put 10 years into this book. You've poured your heart and soul into it. And I'm so excited for the masses to be the beneficiaries of your hard work, your wisdom, and the ease with which you articulate these timeless virtues. And I'm wondering, why did you write it, and what do you hope people will derive from your hard work?
Thank you, Adam. So yes, like nearly 10 years of actively working on this project, and to some extent, working on it my whole life too. I've been thinking about these ideas what is the stuff of human flourishing and the good life? And what does it mean to be human? I've been thinking about those questions my entire life. I was raised in this intellectually omnivorous home. My parents, when my father would read to us about Plato's theory of the forms at night, and my mother was teaching us Hebrew and Greek before English, simultaneous with English. And my parents are both highly educated, but also intellectually and credentialed, but they know that learning is a way of life. And it's just a lifestyle way of engaging with others in the world around us. And that, I think, is the greatest gift that they gave me, just like that outlook on life that's curious and interested in others and other-oriented. And that is really a hallmark of my book. My book is called The Soul of Civility: Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And I talk about civility as being this other-oriented disposition, the disposition that respects others, sees them as beings inherently worthy of respect just because they're human, and that we have obligations to others by virtue of our shared humanity, that we are owed ourselves and owe to others a bare minimum of respect by virtue of just being human. And that the hallmark of true civility is restraint. It's subjugating what we might otherwise want for the sake of a flourishing in society. There are two core aspects to what it means to be human. We are profoundly social. We flourish in community. We become fully human in relationship with others. The Greek word person, the etymology of the Greek word person, means she who stands before someone else. So like the Greek word for human being, for person, it's literally become human in the eyes of others. And so we become fully human in a relationship, and yet we're also defined by self-love. Morally and biologically, we're driven to meet our own needs before others. And those two aspects of who we are intention. And that is why friendship, that is why relationship, that's why the joint project of living well with others is invariably fragile, inherently fragile. It's never a foregone conclusion. And we each have a role to play in seeing our friendships, our society sustained, and to seeing it flourish. The core thing I'd like people to take away from this book is the responsibility and the privilege we each have of being in community with others. Being in society is the highest and best life. but it's also, again, very precarious. And that our daily decisions to think of our others alongside of ourselves, the hallmark of true civility, is the stuff that sees it survive and helps us all flourish in community.
As you're speaking of these timeless truths, I think about this contemporary of Christ who was Rabbi Hillel. He said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And this equilibrium that we walk about being very much oriented, our brain is here for our survival, and yet we are social creatures and we must subjugate ourselves to basically await that second marshmallow, to borrow from that marshmallow study, the willingness to actually recognize that that the greater good is to be of service to others and to actually consider others' needs as well. I was just recently in Japan, where the idea of harmony is so crucial. They're in a very tiny geographic area. They all must get along. And I also think of that African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And one of the things that you're speaking of is that we are better together. And that we are better together if we are actually better together, because we must be better than we might want to be. Our id-driven impulses may be me. And you're saying us comes first.
Yes. And it's so interesting that you say that, because we hear a lot of pundits today, really thoughtful people, writers, commentators, they're thinking about this question. Like, a lot of intellectual horsepower is being and has been targeted to like the loneliness epidemic, the loneliness crisis, that the crisis of friendship, the crisis of community, the crisis of social alienation, division, and fragmentation. David Brooks a few weeks ago had an article in The Atlantic, and the title was, "Why is America so sad and rude?" There's just a lot of really thoughtful, smart people that are thinking about this topic. And, there's a whole genre, a subculture, like Robert Putnam vein. Like, why are we not bowling together? We're individualistic as Americans and we're not doing stuff together. I bring to the table that I think adds essential dynamic to this conversation is that this is not a new problem. This is not a now problem. This is not an America problem. This is a human problem. Blaise Pascal, one of my favorite intellectuals and thinkers, the French pre-Enlightenment, he was kind of anti-Enlightenment, this genius polymath scientist. He said that the human condition is defined by the greatness and wretchedness of man, that we are both great and wretched, and that our greatness lies in that we know that we're wretched, that we have this sort of self-awareness, also our volition, our capability, like which aspect of ourselves are we going to cultivate and practice and habituate and nourish, and that we have a choice. There's this great story about the Cherokee grandfather tells his grandson that tells his grandson there are two wolves that live inside each of us. There's a wolf that is kind and generous and gracious and good and benevolent. And then there's a wolf that is malicious and it wants to dominate others and exert power, and it's cruel. And the grandfather says there's this battle waging between these two wolves within each of us every day, every moment of every day. And the grandson says, which wolf is going to win, grandfather? And the grandfather says, whichever one that you feed. Which one are we going to nourish through our choices, our daily decisions, big and small, how we choose to affirm the dignity, the personhood, the equal moral worth of our co-citizens, of our fellow human beings. That is manifested in small ways, but has big implications for our society, how we choose to value just being generally pro-human in our disposition towards others. And again, this is a problem of the human condition. This is not a new problem, not a now problem, not an America problem. We hear these pundits talking about how we're lonely and we're sad and we're divided. But it's so essential, I think, to zoom out and look at it from the context of the broader human experience, because it humbles us. It helps us recognize that there are no easy solutions. There's no magic public policy that's, a law or, one thing that any one person can do to just change human nature, because it is who we are. And it gives us humility in talking about this question. And it gives us also hope that we each have a role to play in being part of the solution too, by how we live our lives.
Love that. And our mutual friend AJ has described his wolves as being an internal Larry David versus Mr. Rogers, that he has these two different parts that he can feed. And I've kind of come to see them as kind of Ted Lasso versus Roy Kent when he was not in his best moments, or perhaps the other fellow whose name I'm just forgetting at the moment. I do see this as a timeless issue, and yet there is something about now. There are trends where social organizations like Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, Elks Club, even picnics are on the decline. Loneliness has become such a factor that even the Surgeon General has been talking about it as being as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the deleterious nature of it on our health, and the solipsism of being on the web and kind of polarizing on social media. It seems that now is a little bit different in certain ways and the same in others. It's the old AP question of, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I was not in AP English, so I didn't have to address that. But I do remember that being the question. And it seems that you're speaking to that divide. I'm also wondering about the difference between politeness and civility. I know that you are very clear about that. You're the daughter of manners lady whose name I think is Judith. Is that correct?
Judy the manners lady. That's correct.
So let's do a quick contrast between these two concepts. How is civility different from just mere politeness?
So I'll tell you the difference, and I'll tell you the story about how I came to recognize this difference. So politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's behavioral, so external, superficial. Civility is a disposition of the heart. It's it's an outlook. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals and worthy of respect in light of that. And so a little bit about my story. I was raised by Judy the Manners Lady. That's right. Judy the Manners Lady. As I learned while writing this book, there are no fewer than 4 women who are internationally renowned experts in manners and etiquette who are named Judy. Like one of them is Judith Martin, the Washington Post columnist. She might be the most famous, but my favorite is my mother, Judy the Manners. And she's someone that, educated people in what Dale Carnegie called the fine art of getting along. Dale Carnegie is that author of How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Big fan.
Yeah, exactly. And, she knew that the social graces matter. They facilitated human interaction. One thing she always said was that manners mattered because they were an outward extension of our inward character. They reflected what was inside. And my mother, she is both someone that had knowledge and deploys the rules of etiquette, very well, but she also is gracious and hospitable. Like that is true for her, that there is she has a heart of gold. I've never known anyone so gracious and kind and caring. And makes it her mission in life to make the outsider an insider, a stranger a friend. Like she literally has never met a stranger in her entire life. She just met someone on the airplane last night. She just flew in from Vancouver, Canada to help me with my kids while I'm on book tour, which I'm very grateful for. And she just hitched a ride home. Like the stranger that she sat down with on the airplane, invited her to get an Uber ride and share a ride, to my house in Indianapolis.
Wow.
Like people don't do that, but people just she loves people, and people are sometimes perplexed by her and just her zeal for other human beings. Like she just loves friendships and loves people. So sometimes that people are like, wait, what's going on? There has to be an ulterior motive. but more often than not, she blesses them. Like I heard the woman who she carpooled, from the airport with last night say, the woman said, I think there was a reason that we met. Like she just totally blessed this woman. Like, and I know nothing more about that or what they talked about, but that's just, a small example of who she is. So wonderful, epitome of an extrovert, very gracious. So the rules worked for me generally. My mom promised that they would generally work for me well in school and in life and help me succeed. They did. Even though I was skeptical of them, I don't like being told what to do. I'm constitutionally allergic to authority. Adam, I don't like rules just because, someone somewhere sometime said that we should do something a certain way. But I followed them. They worked for me until I found myself in government. In 2018, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was at the U.S. Department of Education. And all of a sudden, everything I thought I knew to be true about the world was refuted and undermined. So I was confronted with these 2 extremes in terms of the people that I was with. On one hand, there were the people with sharp elbows, the people who you knew to kind of stay away from because they were willing to do anything and step on anyone to get ahead, get what they wanted, gain proximity to power, the promotion, whatever it was.
Kind of Machiavellian.
Well,
not quite.
We'll circle back to that in a second. Exactly. So the other contingent was they were saccharine. They were polished and poised and polite. These are the people that I thought were my people, Adam.
Totally.
They were the ones that knew the rules and the social graces, and they were well dressed. And these are the ones that I learned they would smile at me and flatter me one moment and then stab me in the back next, the moment that I no longer served their purposes.
Oh my goodness.
And at first I thought these were polar opposites, right? Like one's aggressive and hostile, the other one's like saccharine and extremely polite, but ruthless and cruel. But I realized actually that they were two sides of the same coin, because both used others as a means to their end. They saw people as instruments to be manipulated rather than people who were worth respecting in and of themselves. And the second contingent especially perplexed me because my mother's words rang in my ears that manners were an outward extension of our inward character. And yet here were people that were polite enough, but also ruthless and cruel and willing to cast people aside the moment they were no longer useful to them.
Yep.
So anyway, I recognized these were two sides of the same coin. I recognized this mismatch between inner and outer manners and morals. And I realized that we had to make a distinction between outward and inward. And so that helped me clarify for me the difference between civility and politeness. Again, politeness is etiquette, it's manners, it's the external, it's technique, it's behavior. And it's entirely possible to know the rules of politeness, to do and say the proper thing, and to have malicious intent, trying to manipulate others. Conversely, it's totally possible to be a good person and just to not know the right rules or to not really care, you know? And so there is this mismatch both ways, that having the rules of politeness doesn't make you a good person, and not having them doesn't make you a bad person. But that's really hard for us as a society because we are really ruthless with people who are socially atypical. And we are very much a society that values, like we want to believe that what we see is all there is. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. So again, civility is a disposition. It's seeing others as our moral equals, worthy of respect in light of that. And that sometimes actually respecting someone means being impolite. It means telling someone a hard truth, engaging in robust debate, telling someone that you think that they're wrong. That's actually a form of respecting someone, not papering over difference, not polishing over a disagreement because it's uncomfortable. That can be patronizing sometimes, to diminish a difference, to pretend it doesn't exist. The etymology, Adam, really quickly, of these two terms supports this distinction. The Latin root of politeness is polliere, which means to smooth or to polish. And that's what politeness does. It polishes over difference. It's superficial. It's external. That's what politeness does. The Latin root of civility is civitas. So it's all things related to the city and citizenship and citizen. It's the habits of citizenship in a city that requires self-governance, it requires restraint, and it requires respecting our fellow citizens enough, again, to have hard conversations, just to tell others that we think that they're wrong.
I love that so much. Before we even get into kind of candor and setting boundaries and disagreement civilly, I just need to comment on what you were talking about, that phenomenon in DC of seeing these two subsets of kind of the same people, just one was faking it. One was actually authentically stepping on people. The other one was creepier. And it reminds me so much of characters from various movies and TV shows like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, where people may be obviously bad. And then there are the people who are maybe creepier still, who seem so smooth and kind on the outside, but will stab you the second that they can. And I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, but it sounds like you were thrust in the middle. You were thrust in the middle of it and you saw this in real life. But because we listen to ourselves more than we listen to other people, you understand that this is really character driven and there is no exact rule book on how, but how can we speak to ourselves to allow ourselves to be more civil? What might be some intentional prompts that we could say to ourselves as we intend to be more civil?
It's a great point, because one thing I talk about in the book is that it's easy today. We hear people on both sides of the political spectrum say, we can't be civil with the other side because they're too bad and the stakes are too high. You know, like they're irredeemable, they're evil, they think wrongly, and they're not just intellectually wrong on this issue, they're morally bad. And we hear that sort of like dehumanizing rhetoric, like that side is not to be reasoned with and they don't deserve respect because they're so bad. And that justifies in many people's minds, as it has across history and culture, that sort of otherizing and dehumanizing language, that justifies not treating them with the basic respect that, again, we are owed and owe to others by virtue of our shared humanity. That's the stuff of civility, the moral foundation of civility. And so we hear also people that say, nice guys can't get ahead. People who are bound, this is Machiavelli too. Machiavelli says, people who are bound by Christian morality, he says, where we treat others well, with compassion and grace and kindness. Machiavelli said there's no hope of those people to gain and maintain power in life. And one thing that I talk about Machiavelli misses that Socrates gets is that we are so interconnected as a species that when we're cruel and malicious, when we dehumanize, when we debase, when we degrade others, that we're not just hurting them because we are, but we're also hurting ourselves. We are debasing ourselves. We are diminishing our own humaneness and our humanity, and we're deforming our own souls. And so one thing Socrates says is that, there's no such thing as nice guys finishing last and people who are ruthless and cruel getting ahead, because people who are ruthless and cruel who are getting ahead, they are sick. Socrates calls that vice, that viciousness, sickness of the soul. And, you're a psychologist, like psyche is soul in ancient Greek. Like you are a doctor, a scholar of the human soul. So I think you'll appreciate this. So Socrates says, vice is sickness of the soul, cruelty, malice towards others. That is not a just soul. That is not a well-functioning soul. That is an unhealthy soul. So people who are malicious and cruel to others, they don't actually deserve our contempt. They deserve our compassion because they are sick. And they might not even realize that they're sick, but they are sick and they're making themselves sicker by living a life of viciousness and cruelty towards others. And that people who live with integrity, with kindness, with grace, with compassion, that they are the true victors, because that kind of virtue, that civility, that treating others with respect, that's its own reward. Having that just soul, that rightly ordered soul that values others alongside of ourselves. And that's its own reward. So there's no nice guys finishing last and there's no bad guys getting ahead in life. That virtue, viciousness is its own punishment, and civility is its own reward. It is mutually ennobling. Just as cruelty is mutually debasing, civility and grace and kindness and compassion, hospitality is mutually ennobling, and so it's its own reward.
I like that a lot. And I had the pleasure of interviewing Steve Kerr, who's one of the winningest people in all of NBA's history, and upon whom, to some extent, I believe Ted Lasso was created at least as one of the prototypes of, the kind, good person coach. They even got a shout out in one of the episodes. And the reason I bring him up, in stark contrast to perhaps a coach who was known for throwing chairs across the basketball court, is that I believe you're right. The victories of those who use people are hollow. I believe in their quiet moments, they're not so happy, even after the victory. But those who are victorious and living in integrity are happier in their quiet moments. And as I contemplate, that last question around the how of civility and how we might speak to ourselves as we're trying to execute on it, I'm thinking of Daryl Davis, a former guest on my podcast, who is an African-American musician who joined up with the KKK, neo-Nazis, and hate groups, not as a member, but to try to help them get in touch with their actual values and see if they were congruous with how they were behaving. And what Daryl found was that by treating them with kindness and civility, getting to know them, and then questioning, what are you actually doing? And is this consistent with the human being you want to be? As a result, over 200 people from the KKK have handed Daryl their robes. And he did this through civility. And as I think about how we speak to ourselves as we are engaging with someone who we may find reprehensible, who we may find is holding on to beliefs, I'm just trying to think of how I would talk to myself so that I could be more civil and perhaps, kind of like Daryl Davis, maybe get in a word that might connect with the person. Because for sure, by othering the others in the other group and dehumanizing them, that's tantamount to bombing them and saying, I will bomb you into submission. That's not going to work long term. You might win the 4 years, but they will come back, and they will come back harder. And only through discourse, only through respect, I believe, can we have sustainable, united results. If united we stand, divided we fall is how we roll, civility is a crucial component, I would say. And executing on it, I still kind of want to know a little bit more of how we might do it.
I have a chapter in my book about hospitality and chapter on education. That section of the book, that part of the final 3 chapters, it's called Civility in Practice, that final section. And so I talk about hospitality, often hospitality, which is a high and noble expression of civility, of that inner disposition. too often today, hospitality is reduced to flying in first class and traveling to nice places and being in nice hotels and nice meals. Like that's the hospitality industry today. People go and get their degrees in hospitality, and that's what they're trained to do, to be in these industries. But there's this rich and vibrant tradition of hospitality as so much more than that. It's kindness to the stranger in need, welcoming someone into your home that you don't know, being bonded by this mutual vulnerability. To be someone who goes into a stranger's home is vulnerable. To be someone who welcomes a stranger into your home is vulnerable. So you're bound by this shared, vulnerability, this shared fate. And Homer's Odyssey, which is all about hospitality. It's kind of a comedy of manners. Odysseus, the protagonist in Homer's Odyssey, it's all about him interacting with different strangers from different places and adapting to the manners and customs of those places. And that's how he survives. So he has nothing but his wits to survive because he's, been unmoored from his home, his family, his kingdom. And so he's just this resilient sort of intellectual MacGyver who adapts to whatever, situation he's in. And very often the whole book is about hospitality. It's what do you owe the stranger and what does the stranger and the guest owe the host? And time and time again, Homer condemns hosts that do things like keep guests against their will, or that try to eat their guests, or that
their guests.
Yeah. So there's a famous vignette. Odysseus arrives on the island of the Cyclops, and instead of being welcomed by the Cyclops begin to eat Odysseus's men. And so that's not a good hostessing.
I would tend to agree. Thou shalt
exactly.
not eat thy guests.
Right. But there's also, guests are bound by certain obligations. So for example, one reason that Polyphemus, the Cyclops, begins eating Odysseus's men is because he felt invaded. Odysseus and his men had showed up in the Cyclops' cave and started eating his food without asking first. That's kind of a faux pas, right? So there's a cautionary tale both sides. Don't be a bad guest. Don't show up at someone's home and just make yourself at home without their first inviting you in. But also don't eat your guests too. Once they're there, it's not. And so Polyphemus ends up not having a good outcome in the end. So Zeus is also the god of strangers. He's the god of xenia. So xenia is this ancient Greek concept of the stranger. And so xenophobia is fear of the stranger. The xenophilia is love of the stranger and the showing hospitality to the stranger in need. And so I talk about how today we are very much less dependent on others. Back in Odysseus's time, it was very uncommon to travel. If you were someone in need and outside of your home and didn't have any money, you either would die or someone would take you in. So there was this sort of universal ethic of showing kindness and hospitality to someone, to the stranger, because you didn't know if you or someone you loved might one day find themselves down on their luck and in need of that same hospitality too. So we see that sort of kindness to the stranger come up across history and across cultural and ethical and religious backgrounds. And one story I love to tell from the Odyssey, there's this trope also across history and culture of the strangers in disguise. So someone coming up to you as if they're no one that can ever do anything to repay you, but then actually being someone really important. So in the Hebrew Bible, for example, that's the three angels approaching Abraham. I love the story in the Odyssey, 1001 Nights. There's lots of examples of that where, Sinbad the sailor and other of the great characters are in disguise. The story of Aladdin, Jasmine is, dressed as a peasant, and then Aladdin is kind to her and helps her, even though he doesn't know that she's the princess. So, but at Odysseus, there's this beautiful story where Odysseus is finally coming home to Ithaca, and he's dressed as a beggar, dressed as a peasant. And his old servant named Eumaeus is one of the first people to greet him. And Eumaeus does not recognize Odysseus. Odysseus looks to Eumaeus as if someone who's even more down in his luck than he is, someone that has even less in the way of worldly possessions and material, needs being met. And what does Eumaeus do? He invites him in. He offers him a meal. He offers him a bath. He offers him new clothes. Again, not knowing that this is his former master in disguise.
Wow.
And Odysseus is overjoyed that, Eumaeus's true character is revealed in this moment of kindness where he welcomes a stranger in and offers him all of his needs being met. And that is really about what true civility is as well. It's not doing kindnesses just to people who can repay us, people who are like us, people who can benefit us in return. It's what we owe the other, the stranger, people who are not like us, people who may never be able to repay us. But again, it's what we owe the other just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. So opening up your home, opening up your life. There's not just practical hospitality. There's intellectual hospitality, just approaching this others with an openness and a grace and a welcoming spirit. That's the soul of civility that I think can change our world.
A hallmark of narcissism itself is only being kind to people who can do something for you or people who are of high status. And I think that's really important of naming. I'm thinking about the Bill and Ted dictate of being excellent to each other as you're talking. I'm thinking about Undercover Boss as the boss who shows up and no one knows it's the boss. There's a reality TV show where that actually happens. So this is kind of a timeless idea of the stranger showing up and being of high status, but showing up as perhaps someone of lower status, and how do they really get treated irrespective of their title. I think of that great TED Talk that I think I heard, or the story I heard of the former lieutenant who was given a very nice mug at his lectern when he was the lieutenant. And then when he was the ex-lieutenant, he was given a styrofoam cup, and he said, it was lieutenant and not me who got the mug. And it was I who got the styrofoam cup. And last but not least, I'm thinking about Truman, who basically said, after his presidency is not up for sale. I do not sell the title. The president is something different altogether. It is a matter of being for the people and differentiating himself from the title itself, which I think is so important for individuation and enmeshment with the title of a thing. So let's go to something you were speaking about, and that is, how do we disagree without being disagreeable?
I think that civility is helpful in preventing us from going to any extreme excesses. So the two extreme excesses that I saw in government were equally as harmful and degrading to the other. One was the extreme hostility, and that could be the hostile truth telling. I'm just telling you the truth, right? I'm just telling you a truth that you need to know, but it's not tempered by actual respect and love and affection for the other, which civility does foster. And then the other extreme is that saccharine, extreme politeness, that politesse that is so coddling of the other that it's unwilling to tell hard truths or have uncomfortable conversations, which again is self-serving, that we might want to avoid a necessary conversation because it makes us feel uncomfortable. That's not loving the other. And I talk about this in the book, that civility requires that we respect ourselves enough to have certain boundaries in place, that we're very uncomfortable today disappointing people by telling them no. It's really hard for a lot of people. We don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And so a lot of people have a difficult time politely declining or kindly, graciously bowing out. But in fact, that's a way of respecting others, but also ourselves. We don't want to say yes to something that might be costly to us and cause unnecessary stress. And we don't want to say yes to something that will cause us to resent the person that roped us into doing it in the first place. So that's a way of mutually respecting us. And again, people who say no a lot might seem disagreeable, and that's okay, right? That's actually a form of respecting other and self that civility requires and demands.
Saying no to somebody feels tantamount in our mind to rejection. And one of the things that we've actually seen in functional MRIs is that the brain responds to rejection the same way it does to physical pain.
Yes.
So there is this tightrope that we walk around wanting to express ourselves, being able to say no so that we don't, I like to call it consent and resent. We don't want to consent and resent. And I do believe that the cells in our body are listening, and that when we represent those cells well and say yes to things that are actually yeses, the cells in our body rejoice and we sleep better and our muscles are more relaxed and we digest better. And when we say yes to something that's actually a no, the cells in our body contract and we actually get tight, and maybe we don't sleep so well. We think, oh gosh, you know what? I said yes to something that was definitely a no.
Right.
And the use of the word no is sometimes the biggest yes we can give ourselves. There are things that I've declined politely, of course, as much as I possibly could. And to this day, I'm so glad. And I'm thinking about the times that I said yes to things that were absolutely no's, and how my body kind of went on strike. It did not like me very much. And then as you're speaking about when we are doing this, perhaps there's even a subconscious defense mechanism because we don't want to hurt the other people. So we go the opposite extreme and we actually decide, in order to convey this truth, I'm going to give them a dose of truth and I'm going to make them into and it, kind of like what Martin Buber talks about, the I and thou versus the I and it, that instead of treating them like brethren, we treat them like others so that we can almost put in a little Kevlar protection against our own perception that we are rejecting them and that we are bad. And we have to almost go the opposite extreme on the pendulum.
I'm so glad that you brought up Martin Buber, because another important intellectual influence on me and this project was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.,
so
for whom Martin Buber was very important, essential. In fact, the title of my book, The Soul of Civility, comes from, is homage to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he makes that same point that we were talking about earlier about civility being mutually ennobling and cruelty being mutually debasing. Dr. King says that segregation is bad for both the segregated and segregator. It hurts the soul of the segregated because it gives them a false sense of inferiority. It hurts the soul of the segregator because it gives them a false sense of inferiority. Dr. King loved Socrates as well. Socrates is cited, throughout his work, but especially several times, I think, in Letter from a Birmingham jail. The point is that these things don't happen in a vacuum. Like, it's not just like, oh, that person is mean to the other. It's like, no, it hurts them too. And same when we're gracious and hospitable and kind, that it doesn't just ennoble others. It makes us more human and more humane too. It cultivates our own humanity. And that's actually a lot of incivility in our world comes from people who insufficiently appreciate the gift of being human. Being human is a gift. Being a human being is a profound gift. And that the more that we cultivate and nurture and appreciate our own humanness, the more humane we become. And the more we appreciate the gift of humanness in others. And we want to seek the good and cultivate the good in others too. So it really does start with human dignity, with Imago Dei, appreciating the gift of being human that each of us possess and treating others and including ourselves in light of that gift.
Beautifully stated. Is there anything, Lexi, that I should have asked but haven't yet?
I think that we should talk about hypocrisy and integrity for a moment. I have a chapter in my book on hypocrisy and integrity, and it gets to this mismatch that I alluded to in my story about being in government, about this mismatch between manners and morals, inner and outer, that it's possible to do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons, right? It's possible for no fault of one's own to not follow the rules of propriety and etiquette and not be a bad person. I learned that in government when I had the privilege of working alongside some of America's disability community. And there was this one horrific, very sad story where I was visiting an institution of higher education dedicated to students with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. And for some reason, I've been invited to this disciplinary hearing. This young girl with Down syndrome, her name was AC, was hauled before this disciplinary committee. Her mom was on the phone because they said the night prior, she had committed an act of intolerance. She had taken a towel and put it on her head, and they thought that was mocking the hijab of her RA. And they said, that's an act of intolerance, and we don't do that here. We don't tolerate intolerance here. And her mom said, we grew up in Indiana, and there's not a lot of diversity here. And she said, I think it was more probably about just ebullience and joy at a new friend and curiosity and wonder at being in this new environment. This is like a few weeks into her being in school. Then about an act of intolerance. And the girl just broke down. She's like, Mom, I can't do this. I need to come home. She never should have come here. I never should have tried to come to school. Mom, just take me home. And her mom shared with the disciplinary committee that, in fact, probably this wasn't a great thing, that it exacerbated a lifelong struggle of this young girl with her disability. And she said, we believe in our Christian home, the mother said, that God created AC perfect just the way that she is, and that he created her for a purpose and for a reason. And it was just so beautiful. I actually ended up leaving the room in tears. It was so moving and so perfect, because it hammers home that that just because people who don't know the rules and expectations of society, for no fault of their own, that doesn't make them a bad person. What does it mean for us to have humility and grace? Actually focus on the intent behind a person's actions and not just being ruthlessly exacting with the manifestation of people's actions. And again, not assume person's polished exterior represents a good heart, and that a person's lack of compliance with social norms represents malice or malintent. What does it mean for us to have humility and grace as a society for others in this season that feels very graceless?
So I'm going to say amen, sister, to that. That is so important. And I think two of the things that we could say to ourselves as we are trying to be civil is, let's get curious, not furious. That's another kind of AJism. And I love that idea, because had they gotten curious instead of furious, that would have made a big difference. And had they assumed good intention, that would have also made a big difference. So I think get curious, not furious, assume good intention. Those might be ways that we could talk to ourselves as we are trying to be more civil. I'm going to ask you my final question, Lexi, and that is this. If you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of the individuals and perhaps even society at large, what would that insight or skill be? And how do you imagine it would affect the individuals and perhaps society?
Such an interesting question. Thank you, Adam. I think that one magical skill that could change ourselves in the world would be to see the thing beneath the thing. And this is something that I am not good at. Like, I often struggle with this. I want people to see the thing beneath my thing, but I have a hard time seeing the thing beneath. And what I mean by this, you may know where I'm going, that like, when people are callous and curt and unkind in the marketplace of life, like airport, like restaurant, like that is not coming from nowhere. There's a lot that has gone into that. Maybe they're at home and they have a child who's terminally ill, or maybe they are just they're not getting a divorce, or they're just so many, like life is just so hard. It is so ruthless. It is so rough. And we never have any idea what someone is going through in life. And often when someone is curt or rude or disrespectful or acting out in some way, we want to just hold them accountable for their actions. At least I do. We want to say, you're a bad person. We want to just write them off, and that's just who they are. But what does it look like to instead tell stories of exoneration, that tell stories that exonerate people and don't convict them and condemn them? Like, we are often judge, jury, and executioner in our, daily social interactions with others and how we judge them. But instead, tell ourselves a story, like what's going on beneath the surface and what has gone on just before that outburst or whatever it was. It's not about me. I think it's really easy for us to just stay surface level with our interactions with others. And for good reason. We're busy, and just the way we're wired, the fundamental attribution error. We're more gracious and understanding with ourselves because we know our own motivations and we know what's gone on in our lives up until that point. Like, we want people to tell stories of exoneration about us when we are at our worst, but we're less gracious towards others and less likely to tell stories of exoneration towards others because we don't know those stories. We don't know what's gone on beneath the surface. So seeing the thing beneath the thing, striving to and telling stories of exoneration might give us more grace and equanimity in this tough, very difficult project of life with others that is so rewarding, but so hard at the same time. And that this just might make it a little bit easier and more fun too.
Lexi, that is gorgeous. I love that idea so much. And it's so simple and so hard to do.
So hard.
And it requires so much patience and willingness to kind of really go into our higher cortex, think and think and think again, and realize that everyone has something. Everyone has something. The handsomest Hollywood star who seems like he's got it all has something. Mm-hmm. The richest person in the world has something. We all have something. And the idea of stories that exonerate, I think, is a really, just formulating a hypothesis. There may be more to the story than what's actually transpiring right now. And I must say, my wife is exceedingly good at this skill. I am a work in process.
Me too, Adam.
It's very hard and continually aiming to up my game. So it sounds like I've got a sister on the same Odyssey to bring it all back to Homer. Lexi, this has been so much fun. I love what you're doing with your time, your skills, and sharing this most important consideration and skill. And I hope that society and individuals will be better for it. You are definitely one of the best spokespeople I could imagine to help carry this out. You are erudite, you are fun, you are real, and it's just been so much fun to get to know you.
Thank you so much, Adam, for having me. Also, I be the first to admit, very imperfect, like writing a book on civility. Like I, fall short of these ideals all the time, and I'm very raw in the book about times where I've fallen short. And I hope that invites people into this journey with me, that it's not me from on high saying, this is what we have to do. It's like me looking at the past, the human condition, greatness and wretchedness, including in my own life, and saying, how can we do better together? so we can all just reap more joy and the great rewards that come from life with others. So thanks so much for having me, Adam.
It was a total pleasure. And Lexi, to be clear, I want to make it just state for the record, you come across that way. You come
Thank
across
you.
as relatable and not speaking from up on high, but as one who also struggles. So thank you for sharing your gift, and can't wait to see what this becomes.
Thank you, Adam.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe